month this month is love your enemies. Pretty short command, but also a command that is not easy to live out. And I hope you've been thinking about it the last couple of weeks as it's been our command of the month. Think about, what am I going to do with that command? What have I done with that command? How am I going to live out love your enemies? There are several reactions I think that people have to this command to love your enemies. For some of you, there's somebody that comes to mind real quick that's really hard to love. And you just think, that person makes my life miserable. I can't love that person. Maybe there's a social or political group that you think of as the opposition. And they're your enemies, because they're enemies to the good in your mind. And you're like, it's not right to love them. Maybe enemy brings to mind some sort of cartoonish villain. You think of, my generation, I think of the Legion of Doom rising up out of the swamp. And I don't have villains or enemies in my life that way. But regardless of how you respond to this idea of enemies in your life, this is a command that Jesus has given all of us. Love your enemies. And he gives it more than once, but we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 6. So I encourage you to turn in your scriptures to Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 27. We're going to be looking at what it means to love your enemies. We're going to be looking at specific examples that Jesus gives on loving your enemies, and also why it's good, why Jesus has commanded this, and why it's good to love your enemies. I'm going to start off with what it means. One of the reasons I decided to study the commands of Jesus was that I was sort of initiated into Christianity with a different set of rules. There were a set of rules, but they didn't really have to do with the commands of Jesus in the Gospels. I think that's probably a common experience. I think most of us were taught the Ten Commandments, which included obey your parents and things like that, and don't lie and don't kill and those things. Of course, Jesus doesn't want us to do those things. We're taught the Golden Rule, which is one of Jesus' commands from the Gospels. Also, we're taught moral markers that set us apart from worldliness that we have, like wait until you're married to have sex, or not cussing, or not drinking, or doing drugs, or things like that. The things that we think of as cultural markers that says, here's where Christians are, and here's where Christians don't. Here's how Christians behave, and here's how Christians don't behave, and we're going to look like we're in the side that's where the way Christians behave, and it's more about like not doing bad things and not following certain rules, and when you look at the commands of Jesus, there are a bunch of, and you list them out, there's a bunch of things that Jesus commands us to do that we just don't think about that much. And we don't think of as part of the forefront of who we are supposed to be as Christians, and don't make it a matter of obedience. And well, I think loving your enemies is one of those. We know that Jesus tells us to love our enemies, but how much have you really thought about it? How much have you made it a priority that says, Jesus commands that I love my enemies, and so I am going to do it because Jesus commands it? How often do we do that? One reason I think we don't really talk about it is because we're taught really not to have enemies, right? There's that verse in Ephesians that says our enemy is not flesh and blood, but the powers of darkness and all these kinds of things. And so we're taught to not have enemies, and that's true. So it's good not to have enemies. It's good to not hate other people because they're your enemy. And to think of them, well, I'm not going to think of them as my enemy. That's a good thing. But who is Jesus talking about when he says, love your enemies? Let's look. We'll start in verse 27. He says, I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. And pray for those who mistreat you. Jesus gives the initial command, love your enemies, then explains it in three different ways. And before we get to those three imperatives that he gives, we need to recognize that he's defining enemy for us. We don't make ourselves an enemy to someone else, but sometimes people make themselves enemies to us, don't they? They hate us. They curse us. They mistreat us. When he says hate, the word means dislike. That they just don't like you. Especially when someone is hostile to you. When they bow up against you, when they oppose you. And it's an attitude, it's a disposition to you. When someone rejects you or despises you, they've made themselves your enemy. He also says, those who curse you. And the word curse here is rare in the New Testament. It's not the normal word for curse. It actually is the word for curse that kind of has a supernatural element. It's almost like they're praying for bad things for you. Praying for your harm. This is someone who works and hopes for your misfortune or your failure. They want you to fail. This word mistreat has the implication of verbal abuse. Maybe those who use you for their own purposes, abuse you out of spite that they have for you. They have disdain for you, or they have unforgiveness toward you. These are those who mistreat you. So who are these people for you? You may be thinking of different people. As I talk about that, there may be people that have come across your path now or in the past, and they were the ones that have set themselves up as your enemies. And when you find somebody who doesn't like you, who is hostile to you, who hopes you fail, who speaks ugly to you, how do you react? Well, Jesus gives us specific imperatives. He says, do good to those who hate you. Do good to those who hate you. If I learn someone hates me, if I learn that someone is hostile to me, my reaction should be to do good to them. Is that your natural reaction? Absolutely not. If I find somebody who doesn't like me, the first reaction is, well, I don't like them either. Even if you did like them before, now you don't. Why don't they like me? Maybe that's your reaction. It's not so much I don't like them either. It's more like, ooh, why don't they like me? You know, and you get all insecure, and it becomes something that you fret over. How can I change my mind? How can I change their mind? How can I make them like me now? Jesus doesn't say fret over those who hate you. He doesn't say hate those who hate you. He says do good to those who hate you. Maybe it's not an individual. Maybe it's a group. Maybe there's a group of people that hates my group of people. We shouldn't hate that group of people back out of solidarity. Don't call them evil or stupid. Find ways to show goodness even to those groups of people. Bless those who curse you. If you learn someone wishes harm for you, do you hope for bad things for them too? What do you do if someone is cursing you or slandering you? If you hear through the grapevine somebody's talking bad about you, do you turn around and talk bad about them? Jesus says, speak blessing in return. Refuse to let your heart curse them. This goes for group versus group as well. Christians don't return cursing for cursing. There's a group out there that hates us and curses us. We don't hate and curse them back. Even if they lie and slander about us, even if they lie about you and slander you, You don't curse them back. You don't lie and slander them back. One of the poisons in our society is this kind of this whataboutism. If somebody is lying and slandering, you think, well, and somebody says, and you start lying and slandering back. They say, well, you lie. That's not true. And they say, well, they did it to me. They do it. Why can't we do it? Jesus shows us a different way. He says, pray for those who mistreat you. When someone is abusive, Jesus calls us to prayer. When the church faces persecution, Jesus calls us to pray for those in power. Our culture is a culture of hate and of fear. We are taught and we are given this idea that there are people out there to get us. We should be afraid of them. That there are people out there to hate. And they're bad and they're evil and they're stupid and they don't deserve our respect. Our culture worships the individual so much that anybody who violates my rights is worthy of my retaliation. Our culture rejects these things, this idea of love your enemies. And it's not just our culture, humanity rejects this idea of love your enemies. And even Christians will try to soften it because they want to take a battle position all the time. So what does it look like to love your enemy? Jesus doesn't let us off the hook, by the way, with his examples at all. Let's read them. Verse 29. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. When someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic as well. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. This is what it looks like. We start with the famous, or maybe even the infamous passage of turn the other cheek. If you hear this phrase outside of the church, usually it's sort of said with disdain. Are they going to turn the other cheek, or are you going to fight back? Are you going to just lay down and turn the other cheek, or are you going to do what you're supposed to do? These kinds of things. And a lot of times when people even talk about this command in Scripture, they try to blunt it. They try to make it not as much of a command as it is that Jesus gives. But let's look at what Jesus is saying and think of it as part of this command to love your enemies. It says, turn the other cheek. If someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to them the other also. He's already told us if someone harms you, Jesus says, go do good to them. Is turning the other cheek for them to slap the second cheek really do good to them? What is Jesus getting at here? He's showing us what it looks like not to return evil for evil. He's showing us what it looks like not to return slap for slap. Not violence for violence. This passage that we just read ended with verse 31. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Do you want to be slapped? Did you like it when they slapped you? Then don't slap back. That's what he's saying. If you don't like to be slapped, then don't slap. If you don't like to be insulted, then don't insult. Is it really necessary to offer the other cheek? Well, that's what Jesus says to do, so I'm not going to say no. Maybe he's talking about standing your ground in a way without returning violence. It's not, if someone slaps you on the cheek, cry and run away. It's turn the other cheek. You're kind of standing your ground if you did that, but not returning violence. The second imperative is don't hold back your tunic either. It's kind of like if someone takes your coat, go ahead and give them your shirt. This is is another picture of doing good to those who hate you, choosing to give to those who take. The 7 verses that lead up to where we started today, verses 20 to 26, if you read them, they're all about trusting God and our focus being on the next age, that God will take care of us and we don't have to get all of our life in this age, that we can look forward to how God is taking care of us now and into eternity. And so if we're talking about trusting God, we don't have to worry about our material things. That if somebody does take our coat, we don't have to worry about our shirt. We can give him that too, because we can trust God with our material things. And that goes into the next imperative. Give to everyone who asks you. Give to who? Everyone. When? When they ask. Jesus, over and over, doesn't seem to have a strong value on private property. It's just, you can't read Jesus' teachings and say, well, Jesus wants you to make sure that you keep what's yours. He doesn't seem to have a strong value on that. He consistently teaches an open-handed approach. Now, are there limitations to every person who asks you? Well, he doesn't give them here. Whatever there are, they're not given here. The best answer is that any limitations will be governed by your love for God and your love for your neighbor, and not by your own rights and your own comfort. Because the next command is, don't demand them back. When someone takes from you, don't demand it back. Jesus is again teaching not to be attached to things. Let others who need them have them. He's telling us, don't stir up conflict over the stuff of this world. Now, is there a limit here? Jesus doesn't give it. Whatever it is, we know that all of his commands are governed by love. Now, there's times when loving your neighbor doesn't mean giving them your stuff. But Jesus is talking here, is teaching us here, and shocking us here into this idea that our stuff is not worth fighting over. And then he comes to the next one, do to others as you would have them do to you. Serve as you would like to be served. Give mercy as you want and need mercy given to you. Extend the benefit of the doubt because you need the benefit of the doubt from others. I don't want to be accused based on someone else's assumptions. So don't make assumptions and then accuse somebody. It means I give the respect I want shown to me. It means I extend grace because I need grace extended to me. It's because it's be generous because I would enjoy others being generous to me. Seek justice as I would want justice done on my behalf if I were the one wrong. Just like I don't want to be attacked, don't attack. As I don't want to be rejected, do not reject. As I do not want love withheld from me, I will not withhold love. And even when someone attacks, we treat him or her the same as we would ourselves want to be treated, not as they have done to me. The rule is not do unto others as they have done to you. We treat attackers the way I would have rather been treated, rather than attacking back. Think about what this looks for you. You know, sometimes you find yourself in a situation like this in marriage. You find yourselves on the other side of the battle line. You're just in an argument. And you're in a situation where you're angry at each other. What are you going to do? You going to attack back? Are you going to return insult for insult? Jesus is teaching us a way toward peace. Think about in parenting. There's times when you feel like, bless those who mistreat you can be hard when it comes to kids. But you think about this in the way you treat your coworkers, in the way that other people in the church, people in the community, your neighbors. How do you treat others as you want to be treated when you're on the internet? How do you treat others as you want to be treated when you're thinking about public figures and politicians and stuff like that? This is hard. It's not easy. It's one of Jesus' hardest commands he gives us. Why would he tell us to do something that's so hard? Love your enemies. Why? This is good. As we read these passages, we often push back. We're trying to find an escape clause. We say, he doesn't really mean this. He can't. It's too hard. I'm just going to be walked over. But just in case you're ready to escape, Jesus reiterates what he just said, and he gives us why he says it. Look at verse 32. It says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend from those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. This is the love that sets us apart as the Lord's. It's like what we talk about Wednesday, for those of you who were there on Wednesday. Everyone connects to people who are like them. Unity across worldly boundaries displays the power of Christ. In the same way, everybody loves those who love them. Loving our enemies is what displays the power of God in our lives. Everyone loves those who love them. Everyone is generous to people who can reciprocate generosity. When we love our enemies and are generous without expecting repayment, we show God's power and his grace, and we testify to the world that God is real in our lives. So Jesus summarizes it again. He says, verse 35, but love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting anything back, then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. This is a reiteration of verses 27 and 30 and a summary of what he's been talking about. And the result of loving our enemies is this, verse 35, then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. Why? Because he is generous to the merciful, to the ungrateful and the evil. Because then we will be like him. Look at verse 36. Be merciful, as your Father is merciful. So the last imperative here is be merciful. How are we to be merciful? Just as your Father is merciful. Why do we love our enemies? Because God did. That's why we even know Jesus. That's why we even have a chance to call God Father, is because he saw us and we were sinners. We were his enemies, and he was merciful to us. He did not hate his enemies. He loved his enemies, and he sent Jesus to save his enemies from death. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good man someone might possibly dare to die, but God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, while we were still his enemies, Christ died for us. His love overcomes our sin, and we're redeemed into a relationship with him. And when we love our enemies, we are living that gospel out. We are becoming living proof of its effect. The truth is we can't do this on our own. We can't try harder and love our enemies better. But this hints at the good news. good news is that in Christ we can be like Him. In Christ we become what we worship. Just like the psalmist says that those who worshiped the lifeless idols became lifeless themselves. One biblical principle is as we worship Christ, we become like Him. We become like Jesus. And Jesus loved His enemies. He was good to those who harmed Him. He prayed for those who persecuted Him. He laid down His life for those who rejected Him. And we can become like Jesus. We can become the sort of person who reacts to enemies this way. And our inability, when we see this command, we say, I can't do it. That's just an indication that we still need to lean into our relationship with Jesus Christ. We still need to draw near to Him and let Him transform us from the inside out. Because that's the only way. That is the only way we're going to love our enemies. When Jesus changes our heart. Maybe as you look this morning at this truth, that you say, you know what? I need the mercy of God. I am the one who set myself up as an enemy of God. And I hear this morning that He loves His enemies. I've done things my way. I have rejected God. But God is telling you right now that I love you anyway. I sent Jesus to die for you, to pay for that sin, and to reunite you with me. If that's you, I encourage you to use your card, your response card. Say, I want to trust Jesus as Savior. Give that to us as it goes around. Or you could come forward during this time of invitation. There's other decisions on this response card that you can communicate to us. Or you could come during the final song and tell us then. The response card is also the rest of us who want to respond to the Lord today. What is it that He is speaking to you? I encourage you to use your insert or use this card and say, write down something. Say, this is how I'm going to try to obey this command this week. This is how I'm going to make an effort to hear the command of Jesus and obey. The only reason we're here is because God loved His enemies. And He calls us to do the same. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you loved me even though I was your enemy. And even when I mistreat you, still, you love me. You hope for me. You treat me with love. God, I pray that we would be people that display the power of God in the way that we love those who do not love us. The way we bless those who curse us. God, help us in every conflict. Whether it's with those that we normally love, like in our marriages and our families, whether it's people in the world. We would look at what Jesus says here and treat others with the mercy and the love that you've extended to us. In Jesus' name that I pray.